A science story, huh?
These NYU scientists,
I felt
really
right.
but I was so
And I just thought, well,
I had figured it out
It was that golden moment.
because science was on my side.
Hey everyone, welcome to The Story Collider, where true personal stories about science help us discover how weird and wonderful it is to exist in this world and be a human. I'm your host, Misha Gajewski, and today's stories are all about that humbling moment when you find out you're not a natural at something. We've all been there, where we're good at something and then all of a sudden we level up and make the shocking discovery that we're actually not hot shit. So fun. Our first story is from the William R. Kenan Jr. Professor of Education and Dean of the School of Education and Human Development at the University of Virginia, Stephanie Rowley. Her story was recorded at a special show we did at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville earlier this year. Here's Stephanie.
In 1992, I was a doctoral student here at UVA, and I was in my very first doctoral course with Bennett Burtonthal. The class was Intro to Cognitive Psychology, and I loved this class. And I have to say, I aced the first exam, and that exam led to a great conversation with Bennett, where he was just trying to get to know me, and I was sharing with him how I ended up at UVA and some of the things that brought me here. And I'll never forget, he said in that conversation, "You know, Stephanie, you've lived a charmed life." And I thought, what does that mean exactly? Even now, I think back to this so often. And I think that what he was referring to, given the context, was really that I had been very successful in my applications to graduate schools and getting fellowships and just lots of opportunities that were open to me. And so I could kind of see his point that I had been successful and had been very fortunate. Even after that class was over, I continued to meet up with Bennett from time to time as an informal mentor. And so toward the end of my time at UVA, he came to me and said, "Stephanie, I have just the job for you. UNC Chapel Hill is looking for someone who does exactly the type of research that you're doing, and I think that you should apply." And so I did apply, and I got the job, and it was amazing, so exciting, because this was really the dream, to get a tenure track job at a top institution right out of graduate school. And to be honest, I felt really well prepared for it. I had lots of publications. I had taught my own courses. I just felt like I was ready for this tenure track position. In addition, I was able to negotiate this really sweet deal where I didn't have to teach for the first year. So I could just focus on my research and getting it kind of launched in the first year. So I decided to take advantage of the opportunity, send out a bunch of papers, write a grant proposal to the National Science Foundation, and that's exactly what I did. So I got several papers out the door in that first year and was feeling good. So this was the 90s, and the publication process was incredibly slow because, of course, we used snail mail, if you can imagine. So you would print out the manuscripts, multiple versions, or multiple copies, send them off to an editor. The editor then would distribute them to expert reviewers who would then write down all of the strengths and weaknesses of the paper, send that back to the editor, and then the editor would make a decision. Accept the paper, reject the paper, or maybe kind of the sweet spot was revise and resubmit, right? So they were inviting you to fix the paper and send it back and probably get it published. So all of this took like 6 to 12 months because of the snail mail. And so I sent these papers off and then turned to my NSF grant, wrote the proposal, didn't think much of it. And then one day I went to my mailbox in the psych department, and there was this very ugly envelope. I don't know what happened, but it looked like a truck had rolled over it a few times. All of these postal markings on it. And I saw the return address and I said, "Oh, this is the review from my first paper. And so I was on my way to a meeting. I took the envelope with me, and I opened it just before I got in the room. So I scanned the letter very quickly. I didn't read any of the detail, just looking for the bottom line. Were they going to publish it or not? And I saw the words, "Unfortunately, I cannot publish this manuscript in its current form." Okay, not terrible. "And because it's doubtful that even a major revision would make it publishable, we're not even going to invite a resubmission." So this is my first paper. I was devastated, and I'm headed into a meeting. And so I get into the meeting, and my hands are shaking. I was super nervous. I just put everything back in the envelope and put on a big smile and pretended like nothing happened. Got back to my office, stuck it in a drawer, walked away. And then 2 weeks later, I thought, I should probably know what's in the letter. I should probably think about whether or not I could do something with this paper. So I read the letter, and basically it said, I hadn't done a very good job of motivating the paper, of describing why the questions were important, of showing why this would add to the scientific literature that was out there, or how people might apply it to help people live better lives. It also said things like my writing was clunky and a little disjointed. And the real killer, it reads like a dissertation. Right? And I thought, oh my goodness, they know. Here I am in this fancy job, and I don't know what I'm doing, and I just got here, and they know. And so I thought, but it's the first paper. I'll keep going. I've got 2 or 3 other things in the pipeline. But then they came back. Not revise and resubmit, but reject, reject, reject. And I thought, okay, I'm in trouble. I've got this fancy job, and I've told everybody I'm doing this really important work, and I've got a ton of publications. So how in the world had I been so successful? And I had this fatal flaw, which was that I was not a very good writer, apparently. So then I had to think, what happened? So I went back over my graduate school years here at UVA, and what I realized was that the thing that was my strongest asset was actually my biggest weakness. I was amazing at statistics. Loved statistics. I was the statistics girl. I took every statistics class we had. I actually TA'd our advanced graduate level statistics. I spent 4 years as a statistical consultant at the help desk, which means that I was actually a consultant to many of the faculty around campus. And yet I was not a great writer. And so what I realized was that in my version of science, I was the statistics person, and other people in my team were writing the conceptual parts of the paper. And that meant that I had underdeveloped that particular skill that is so critical to helping people understand the importance of the work that I was doing. So now I had to figure out what in the world do you do about this, right? So fancy job, charmed life, the whole nine. And I had to get some help, which means that I had to be vulnerable. I had to tell somebody. So I thought, well, I'm not telling these people who just invested in me and hired me. I'm going to tell my friends from graduate school, which was also difficult because I was the oldest, most senior in my lab, and people looked up to me. But I told them I'm not a good writer, and I need some help. And could you read my papers for me before they go out for publication? And my friends agreed. So we had this sort of exchange program going where I'd send my papers to them and they'd send theirs to me, and they would give me the harshest feedback possible. And it really helped me to understand where I was going wrong and how to improve my writing. And certainly it added a lot of time to the publication record. So if you look at my CV, don't Google. But if you look, you see there was a very, very slow start because I had this extra step. But over time, over 2 or 3 or 4 years, those editorial letters started coming back with acceptances, and I was on my way, and I felt pretty good about it. And so eventually I got tenure, and now I feel pretty confident about my writing here 25 years later. I still think about those weaknesses from the beginning, and I go through that mental checklist when I write a paper. And I still remember my 2000 single-authored paper that was published that wasn't the best paper or in the best journal, but I knew that it reflected a lot of hard work and a lot of humility.
Not only is Stephanie good at writing papers now, but she's also pretty great at writing stories, if I do say so myself. If you'd like to learn more about Stephanie, head over to our website, storyclatter.org. And if you want to hear other stories from UVA, check out our friends Who's in STEM, available anywhere you get your podcasts. Not everyone feels comfortable stepping up to the mic, and that's completely okay. There's another way to make Story Clatter happen, by becoming a donor. Right now, more than ever, the voices of scientists and science communicators need to be heard. At Story Clatter, we know that personal stories can break through the noise, connect people to the human side of science, and make complex ideas feel real. But keeping these stories alive and accessible takes support. Our donors make this possible. They help us produce this podcast, share stories that might otherwise go unheard, and spark conversations that stick with you long after the episode ends. If you believe in the power of science storytelling, consider making a donation at storyclatter.org/donate. Most people give $10 a month, but every tax-deductible gift, big or small, helps keep the mics on and the stories coming. Thank you for helping make sure these voices are heard. You've probably seen the headlines about cuts to foreign aid this year and the real concern they raise for people in some of the world's poorest communities. It's hard to know what's actually happening or how to help. GiveWell, this episode's sponsor, doesn't claim to have all the answers, but their team of researchers is analyzing the effects of these cuts in real time, identifying highly cost-effective ways to save and improve lives, and sharing what they learn for free. Over 18 years, GiveWell has directed more than $2.5 billion from 150,000 donors to the highest impact programs they found. Rigorous research suggests those donations have saved over 300,000 lives and improved millions more. You can explore all of GiveWell's transparent research at givewell.org. And the best part? Thanks to the donors who choose to sponsor their research, GiveWell doesn't take a cut from your tax-deductible donation to their recommended funds. If this is your first gift through GiveWell, you can have your donation matched up to $100 before the end of the year, or as long as matching funds last. To claim your match, go to givewell.org and pick podcast, and enter the Story Clatter at checkout. Make sure they know that you heard about GiveWell from the Story Clatter and get your donation matched. Again, that's givewell.org, code the Story Clatter to donate or find out more. Our next story is from Kate Schmidt. She's an early childhood educator and planetarium pilot at the American Museum of Natural History. Her story was recorded earlier this year at QED Astoria in Queens, New York. Here's Kate.
From the day I was born, I was told I was special. My mom had a very rough childhood, which meant having a kid was both physically and emotionally difficult. And I was her only child, and she was my only parent. I grew up in Southern California, in a suburb of Los Angeles. And because I was special from a young age, I was put in a gifted and talented education program. I was actually really lucky in elementary school to have excellent math teachers, particularly Miss Rock, who was not just a good math teacher, but was really good at telling me that I was good at math, which I don't think a lot of little girls get to hear. I was also a highly competitive kid and constantly vying to be the smartest person in the room. See, my mom didn't just want me to be special. She needed me to be special. I was her lifeline. We struggled a lot financially when I was a kid, and you kind of internalize that, and you see yourself as the financial burden. The other thing is, when you're an only child of a single parent, you're kind of the only other adult in the room, whether you're 5, 10, or 15. So I grew up being special. And California was hit with a little recession long before the 2008 crisis. Our family would be hit hard. And in 2006, we would move to a place that was more southern than Southern California, to the middle of Arkansas. I was 12 years old, on the verge of being a teenager. Moving to Arkansas was insane. It was a massive culture shock. I went from being a minority in my class to going to a school with 2 Black students in it. I went from living in a place that had mountains and deserts and oceans nearby to a flat landscape. I went from living in a place where it rained once a year to a place where tornadoes were a regular occurrence. But there were 2 things that were the same. And the first was the night sky. when I first moved to Arkansas, I soon learned that I could push the screen out from one of my bedroom windows, and I could sit out on the roof, and I could see Orion. And he was the same Orion that I had seen in Southern California. Instead of peeking over mountaintops, he peeked over a flat landscape, but he was still there. He still rose higher in the sky as we got closer to winter. He still chased towards the bull with his bow and arrow. His dog, Sirius, still followed him. And as I sat on that roof, I wanted to know everything about Orion. And more than that, I wanted to be a part of Orion. I wanted to be a star in Orion's belt because I wanted to be off this planet. I wanted to be away from this stupid state with its stupid flatness and its stupid mosquitoes. And in high school, my mom needed me to be special more than ever. My mom ended up having a surgery and, like many Americans at the time, was prescribed painkillers and ended up addicted to opioids. And then more than ever, she needed me to be special. I took every AP class my high school offered. I got straight A's, and I would graduate high school valedictorian. I would then move 1,000 miles away from Arkansas, 2,000 miles away from California to Rochester, New York, to study physics and astronomy at the Rochester Institute of Technology. Now, the first thing I'll say about Rochester is I do not recommend trying to study observational astronomy in one of the cloudiest cities in the country. There is a reason I did not go back there last year for the solar eclipse. But even when the clouds parted, Orion was still there. And as I went through my degree, I started to learn more about the actual stars that made him up. Betelgeuse was this dying red star. Rigel is this bright, hot OBA star. The middle star of Orion's belt is a stellar nursery. Within one constellation, you could track the entire life of a star. But something had changed when I got to college, something that was pretty evident in one of my first classes. See, many physics students take a class called special relativity, which is all about the relationship between space and time and how the speed of light is kind of the bridge between the two. The speed of light is denoted by the letter C, which is the grade I got in that class. And it was the first C I had ever gotten. It was average. I was average? No, that can't be. I cried. I was devastated. I remember walking to my professor's office, finding some way of bargaining with him. Yeah, that would work. I ended up being too afraid and just walking home. But that C would set the stage for much of my physics degree. All of a sudden, I was in a place where I was not the smartest person in the room. And in actually most of my physics classes, I got C's or D's. I wasn't even average. I was below average. And I was in a highly competitive room. See, physics to this day is still heavily male-dominated. I was one of 2 women in my entire program. I was the only queer woman in the program. And when you're surrounded by a bunch of men trying to be the smartest person in the room, there's no room for weakness. This is a culture that did not allow for asking questions in class. This is a culture that did not allow you to be wrong. And this was a culture that was incredibly unkind to women. I remember one time we were in this place called the Physics Activities Center, which was supposed to be like a little physics community hub. And it was really just a competition room. We're all sitting around working on a homework problem and trying to solve the same problem, and we're all stuck in the same way. And I suggested a possible solution, and everybody in the room, who were all men, brushed it off. And then Ryan Scott, who was sitting right next to me, about 5 minutes later, suggested the exact same thing. And I called him out on it. And I said, "Hey, man, I just said that." And what I was expecting to hear from the room was something like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, we didn't hear you. I wasn't paying attention." And what I got was, "Stop being so bitchy, Caitlin." And at the time, I internalized that. Looking back now, I'm like, I was not being bitchy. But at the time, I thought I was. I was stupid. I was bitchy. I was below average. I was no longer special. I stopped answering the calls from my mom because I couldn't tell her I was failing. I stopped answering the calls from all of my family because my whole family saw me as the smart kid, and I was no longer that. I had lost an entire identity in 2 years of school. There was one night, I was thinking about it a lot, and I sat on my shower floor crying, thinking about how I wasn't who I was anymore. And if I wasn't special, if I wasn't smart, then who was I? I was nothing but a burden on my mom, a burden on this school, a burden on the idea of physics. And honestly, in that moment, I wanted to be nothing rather than a burden. And I seriously thought about ending my life that night. I ended up crying in the shower most of the night and eventually went to bed and woke up the next day. For the rest of my junior and senior years, though, I didn't go to many of my physics classes. I did, however, go to my electives, which were astronomy and math classes. These were classes that were taught by women. These were classes that had other women in them. These were classes I felt comfortable raising my hand and being wrong. These were classes I actually got A's in, and I could feel some semblance of that special identity back in me. I was really lucky that my university astroprofessor, Dr. Jen Connolly, ended up being my mentor at RIT. I would spend many nights at the RIT Observatory with Dr. Connolly studying a cataclysmic variable star, and eventually I would get to go to Kitt Peak, Arizona, and use the 0.9 meter wind telescope to study the same star. Dr. Connolly would even help me get an internship at the Rochester Museum and Science Center in the planetarium there. I felt like an Apollo astronaut in that planetarium, fussing with dials and twiddling knobs and moving this giant ecliptic arm that across the dome. And people would come up to me after my planetarium shows and ask me questions, and I actually knew the answer to them. I was starting to build a new identity, one that wasn't wrapped up in being the smartest person in the room, but one that was wrapped up in just teaching people about space. I quickly realized I liked talking to the general public a lot more than I liked talking to my peers. I would end up running a program called the Night Skies Program, and we'd put telescopes up on the roof of the museum. And there was one night, we had this 8-inch celestron, and we're looking at Jupiter. We were lucky that the great red spot on Jupiter was facing us that night. There was this 70-year-old woman who came up and she looked through this telescope and she asked me what that red spot was. I told her it's this massive hurricane about 1.5 times the size of planet Earth that's been raging for hundreds of years. And what you're doing is looking at weather on a different planet. And I watched her eyes grow wide in astonishment. She told me it's one of the most amazing things that she had ever seen. And that moment sticks with me. A lot of observational astronomy students take a look at Jupiter and it eventually becomes mundane, but to that woman who had lived a lifetime, it was amazing, and I had the power to show her that. I would eventually get a job at the Franklin Institute after I graduated college, barely. And it was my job to go on stage in front of a bunch of children and blow stuff up and make them happy with science. And there's nothing quite like the ego boost of 100 fourth graders all chanting Caitlin the Science Guy to the tune of Bill Nye. I had started to build a new identity for myself, one that was not wrapped up in being the smartest person in the world, one that didn't need to be special, but one that was a science communicator, one that was a crocheter, a Lego enthusiast, an avid fan of the Philadelphia Eagles. My identity now contains more than just one thing. It is multifaceted and changes and morphs as the world changes and morphs around me. And in my time, I've come to learn that I am pretty special. See, when you study astrophysics, one of the first things you learn is scale and distance. And the universe is really big, like one of the biggest things out there. In fact, the closest star to us in Orion is Bellatrix at 244 light years away, which means it takes the light from that star 244 years to reach us. Our universe is really big. And as far as we know it, planet Earth is the only part of the universe that has life. We are the only part of the universe that can think about the universe. And to me, that's pretty special. Thank you.
I really like that ending takeaway from Kate, that our identity contains multitudes, and we shouldn't just define ourselves by one thing. Anyway, if you'd like to learn more about Kate, visit our website, storyclatter.org. Our website is just one way to connect with Storyclatter, but there are so many other ways, and we hope you'll use them all. You can always follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Head to storyclutter.org to become a financial supporter. If you're interested in coming to one of our shows, starting a story clutter show in your own community, or even learning how to tell your own science story, you can find everything you need on our website. And if you enjoyed this podcast, the best way to support us is simple. Tell a friend. Share an episode, introduce someone to the Story Clutter, and help bring more people into the world of science storytelling. This podcast is produced by me, Misha Gajewski, along with Jen Chen, Nikisha Roberts-Washington, and Erin Barker, Executive Director and Co-Founder of the Story Collider. The stories featured in today's episode were produced by Tracy Segarra, Julio Chavez, Shane Hanlon, and me, Misha Gajewski. Special thanks goes out to the Story Collider's board and team. Our theme music is by Ghost, and next week we'll be back with 2 amazing stories about not being dramatic. Although, I think there might just be a hint of drama. Until next time, thanks so much for listening. Looking for a podcast to help you survive and actually thrive this holiday season? Check out All the Hacks. All the Hacks is hosted by Chris Hutchins, a financial optimizer who's been everywhere, literally. He's traveled to 60-plus countries, racked up millions of rewards points, and sold 2 companies. And if you're like me and planning to travel over the holidays, you've got to check out the Airport Lounge episode with Kevin Song. It was so useful. He breaks down exactly how to access the best lounges, even if you're not flying first class, shares underrated perks, and gives you the inside scoop on how to actually avoid crowded lounges. I'm definitely going to be using all these tips and tricks this season and anytime I travel. All the Hacks is full of practical tips you can start using right away. Plus, the guests are always great. You'll hear from people like skateboard legend Tony Hawk, 3-time Olympic gold medalist Kerry Walsh Jennings, and a whole roster of scientists and experts who are on top of their game. So do yourself a favor, search for All the Hacks, that's All the Hacks in your podcast app, hit follow, and start upgrading your life today.